Welcome back to Ted Talking on Tuesday about edible landscapes. All right, in this presentation today, we're going to revise or revisit our understanding of site assessment. All right, so in the pictures that are coming with this, when I moved into this house, Cortez Junction, 7 years ago, and it's just not much on the landscape. So you've got to employ your imagination, and you've got to look at it, and you've got to see what it's going to become, the potential that's there. All right, so you have to incorporate some creative juices to get them flowing. All right, don't look at the way it is, but also when you are anticipating and planning for what you're going to put in, you're of course understanding water flow and those kind of things, water catchment, etc., ground covers, spacing. And that's what I want to mention that you give attention to. Again, I've mentioned my daughter's house in Glendale. She just bought this house. The previous owner, a palm tree, a small one. It's probably only 3 inches in diameter. So it's just probably started up on its own, or bird droppings, and it's right up against the backyard block fence, crammed up against it. Now, this California fan palm could end up eventually having a 2-foot diameter trunk. And when it's right pressed up against the wall, that's not where you want it. Now, however it got there, I don't think somebody planted it there, but we moved it, all right? And so you've got to look at a plant, and you're going to put a tree somewhere, understand that it's going to get bigger, and you've got to allow for the spacing. Oftentimes when you buy a plant, it's going to tell you how big it's going to get and how far to space things out. That's important. It doesn't seem now like it matters because it's a scrawny little stick, but it's going to become a big tree, hopefully, if it's going to work out well. In my daughter's house, she planted a mesquite tree. The neighbor has a mesquite tree that's got to be 2 foot in diameter, 2 or 3 stories tall. It is massive, okay? Given enough time, it's going to fill out your landscape. So when you put it in place, you've got to bear that in mind. Anticipating you're going to be successful, and it's not going to die because you didn't plan it for it just to die. You have to make this investment. All right, so there's going to be this contrast, and you're going to transition as time goes on from what you've got to what it's going to become, okay? Now, a question comes up, are you going to plant seeds or seedlings? All right, so one other person in Cortez Junction, they're putting in some landscapes, and I asked them, because they're wanting to, like I did, pick fruits from wolfberry, and I took the seeds out of the fruit after I ate the fruit and planted them in the soil. Been watering them now for 6 months, maybe even longer. Nothing has happened. Not sure why that is, but seeds have a germination requirement, and part of that is scarification. You could plant a mesquite or a bean seed, a mesquite seed, in the ground, and it'll sit there for 10 years, and nothing's going to happen. You have to break the seed coat. So in nature, when a mesquite pod goes through the gut of an animal, the acid is going to scarify and remove some of the seed coat. So when it gets in the ground, then water can actually get into the embryo, and it can germinate and start growing. If you don't break the seed coat through either acidic or physical scarification, scratching, sandpaper, something, depends on how big the seed is, you could put them in some sand and stir it around for a while, and hopefully that might do the job of scarification. So you're going to want to look up something about those seeds, natives. I planted graythorn the other day, okay? We mentioned before plant families, all right? So the rose family, this graythorn is not a rose family plant, but it has the same kind of fruit. It's called a drupe, hard, stony pit in the fleshy fruit, so like a cherry or a peach or an apricot, okay? Now, I just planted the seeds. I just ate the fruit, took out the seeds, put them in the soil. Nothing, one seedling I think is coming up, okay? but it may need or help them if they're scarified. And so I have to experiment with that. All right. So these things are usually not set in stone or just done. Okay. Even when you're landscape, you've gotten it started, you're looking at it, it's never finished. Okay. It is a living thing, and you have to understand it's not like a mechanism, like a robot to flip the switch on and off. It's going to respond to stimuli, how you treat it, the environment you create around it. So it's alive, and that's a big difference from a simple mechanical or electronic system. Okay. All right. Next. The landscape, as it transitions from where you're starting, which may just be bare ground, to where it's going to be further developed. For example, along a white picket fence that I put in there, okay? So when I got it in there and it's just nothing, it's a dead bunch of sticks. But I'm going to plant blackberries and grapes together, and now that entire fence, you can't even see that it's there. It's supporting that living hedge, basically, that's just covered in blackberries and grapes, okay? But it's not finished. It's never finished. It's going to overgrow. You're going to have to cut it back. When you cut it back, what happens? Often that's an incentive to produce more flowers and fruits, which is what you want. So it's this interaction that's constantly going on. That's part of the lifestyle. It's not just going to put it in there and it happens. You're going to have to really make an investment, okay? So you've got to remain flexible. You have to take a risk, and you've got to be willing to fail, okay? When you plant a seedling, it's not always going to work. You can do everything right. There's an organism, they're not all of the same fitness or strength or vitality, and some of them are just not going to make it, no matter what you do. So don't lose heart, press on, keep at it, and know that it's worth it, okay? Different approaches to the environment that's edible. All right, so I built a greenhouse this year, and that's a whole different set of circumstances, and a lot of people are not going to go to that effort to do that. And I only did that for the citrus that I wanted to grow and create a more protected environment from the harsh winters here. Raised beds are common. You may simply go with a container, a set of container pots on your patio, and start with that, okay? Oftentimes, you're going to get more production than you can even fathom. Eggplant, okay, I've got several eggplants coming in, zucchini, yellowneck squash, and you think it's just one or two plants, but you're probably, if everything's going well in that environment, not even going to be able to consume all of what you're producing. So you're either going to need to give it away, preserve it in some fashion, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. Okay, we're going to talk about some of that here in the time ahead. Another factor, a few years ago, water restrictions were imposed. The notice that went out said this: it's okay to water your livestock, but don't water your landscape. I didn't like that. You can move some of the livestock off. I cannot move my peach tree off the landscape. It just doesn't work that way. I notified the water company of this factor. I never got a response, okay? But that brings up the point that I've made before about waste. Don't waste anything, and be conscientious about the ground covers. It's going to preserve the water so that whatever you're putting on it is going to go where you want it to be, and it's not just simply going to evaporate, okay? So I've got a couple of pictures here. When I bought the first chest freezer, I thought it was enough, Okay. Right now, my one chest freezer is full of primarily two things: cactus pads and spinach. I never envisioned the cactus to, when I trim it, the little pads to eat as a vegetable. That's the first vegetable I harvest in the winter, along with carrots and spinach, but that's usually the first one to come up or, harvest. So you just put out more pads. And I took those in. And then they just put out more pads. It just wouldn't stop. And I haven't experienced that before. I thought it would just be done with one harvest. No, it keeps going and going and going. And now I have to throw them all in the dumpster because there's just so much. I can't incorporate all of it. So I don't can things, jar things, whatever you want to call them. I freeze things. And that's one chest freezer is not big enough now. And so I've got to use another one. And I've given away so much prickly pear and over the years, and yellowneck squash, things like that, and it's still not enough. I mean, I have too much produce, and I only have a half acre. You don't need 50 acres, 5 acres, or any of that kind of. You can do a lot with a little if you just maximize your time, effort, and focus your attention on what you're doing. But you can just start small, a few containers on your patio, and that, see what you go, how that goes, and hopefully your success will encourage you to do more. Okay. I want to mention some more books before we close today. Now, the problem with books on edible landscapes, for example, is you usually get three different kinds of books, actually. So one is on gardening, and those gardening books, which I did not bring in any of those today, will give you the basics on the soils, the temperature, the watering, the zones in the country, on the conditions, overall summer, winter temperatures. And I've mentioned the county extension agent, and their website has different seasons when you're going to plant some things. I will usually, since we live in Mayor, Yavapai County here, lower elevation, about 3,600 feet in Cortez Junction. I cannot get tomatoes in February from Prescott Valley suppliers. It's a waste of time. You can't plant anything that early, but you can in Phoenix, Salt River Valley. So I'll go down there and I'll get the tomatoes and the eggplant and the peppers and all those things, and I'll bring them up. Before I had the greenhouse, at night I would take them into the garage so they didn't freeze, and then I would take them out in the containers in the day, and so I can get them started and get my growing season with the seedlings, not the seeds, because it's going to increase your production and speed of getting a harvest. I had tomatoes the first year I was here producing on the plant into December. So we have a longer growing season and higher elevations like Prescott Valley, not as long as Phoenix, Salt River Valley. But one thing I will personally have to do anymore is skip the winter. I've got to take a break from it and not have it going continually all year, but you could. So now with the greenhouse, I get those plants started earlier in February often, when I've got the winter garden and the raised beds, carrots, spinach, those kind of things. And then I've got the plants from the lower elevation desert in the greenhouse and getting them started. So when summer planting comes, I've already got flowers and sometimes fruits already going when other people are just getting the seeds or plants in the ground. All right. So I mentioned the books. And so I want to mention the best one that I have found, Wendy Hodgson's book on the native uses of Sonoran desert plants for the past 1,000 years. Okay, so this is her thesis back from the 70s, I think, at ASU, and she finally got it into a book form, I think, in the 90s. And so that is going to tell you the nutritional value of things, prickly pear and other natives that have been such an important part of the nutritional and survival of indigenous peoples in this area. It's like where we live. So Yavapai tribe, Apaches, and so forth. Okay, so that's a very good book. Food Plants of the Sonoran Desert. Okay, some more that are edible and useful plants of the Southwest. Okay, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, Delana Tull. Okay, so chaparral, manzanita, those kind of things, which can be ornamental plants and be lovely, but you can also eat the fruit thereof. Okay, so that's not just the food plants, but fiber, medicinal uses, things like that. So that's a very worthwhile source to have on hand. And I know that stuff is on the internet, okay? But oftentimes that information, you have to look at the source and determine critical thinking on the authority of the source, if they know what they're talking about. Anybody can put up a website, and often do. The books take a lot more investment and oftentimes are more authoritative than what's online. Not always. There are some very good online sources. Obviously, I've mentioned the county extension agent. All right, Nature's Garden and a Forager's Harvest. This is by the same author, okay? What's his name? Samuel Thayer. Now, this guy writes extremely well. The problem with a lot of these books, however, these are nationwide books, plants all over the country. Oftentimes, Arizona is slighted, and a lot of the plants that we have are not included in these books. And that's why Delana Tull's book about the Southwest is so important, because it's about right here, okay? These books with a national focus, however, often only have a few of the plants that we have growing around here. But he does an excellent job on explaining things, how to process things, recipes, oaks, for example, acorns. He goes into great detail on the vast food value of acorns. Okay, do I eat acorns off my lot? I have native oaks there. No, too much work. It's a lot easier to eat zucchini and peaches. However, they take a lot more water than the oaks. I don't water the oaks. They're established natives, and I don't have to do anything with them but trim them back every now and then. Same with the mesquite. I've harvested the mesquite. Too much work grinding the pods, and I've used it in bread flour, things like that. But so you've got to decide the lifestyle for you, how it works for you. What's going to match you. Okay, so that's going to conclude our presentation today. Back shortly on Tuesday with some more information about edible landscapes. See you.